The room is silent except for the heavy thud of Ethan's heartbeat, loud enough to drown out even the ticking of the antique clock on the wall. Richard Cole, his father, towers at the head of the mahogany table like a judge ready to deliver a death sentence. He slams a thick, leather-bound file onto the polished surface with a crack that makes Ethan flinch. "Do you have any idea who she really is?" Richard's voice is sharp, cold, and laced with rage. Ethan's throat tightens. He can barely look at the file. It feels radioactive, as though opening it will detonate something that can't be undone. Dr. Elena Moore stands frozen a few feet away. The usually composed professor looks small, fragile, her elegant posture crumbling under Richard's glare. Her chest rises and falls quickly, but she says nothing, not a single word in her defense. "Dad," Ethan's voice is low but steady, though inside he's unraveling. "Whatever's in that file doesn't change how I feel about her." Richard leans forward, his face red with fury. "That's because you don't know the truth. You've been living in a fantasy, son. And when you see what's in here," he taps the file with a single finger, "you'll wish you had never stepped into her classroom." Ethan's palms are sweating. He looks at Elena, silently begging for some explanation, some sign that this is just another one of his father's scare tactics. But the look in her eyes, sorrowful, defeated, tells him this is real. Whatever is in that file could destroy everything. Flashback 1 month earlier. The smell of fresh coffee and old books filled the air, as Ethan sat in the back row of the lecture hall, twirling a pen between his fingers. He didn't need to be here. He didn't need anything, really, not the degree, not the grades. Being the only son of Richard Cole, billionaire and CEO of Cole Global, meant he had a future already paved in gold. But he didn't want that future. He came back to school because he wanted something different, something real. And then she walked in. Dr. Elena Moore. She wasn't like the other professors. There was something magnetic about her. She didn't just teach philosophy. She made it feel alive. Her voice was calm but powerful, drawing everyone into the questions she posed. "What would you do," she asked that day, "if telling the truth meant losing everything?" Ethan had felt something shift inside him. After class, he found himself walking up to her desk, heart beating faster than he wanted to admit. "Your lecture was different," he said, realizing how lame that sounded the moment it left his mouth. She smiled politely, tucking a loose strand of chestnut-brown hair behind her ear. "That's the point," she replied softly. "Philosophy is supposed to make us uncomfortable. It's supposed to make us think." That was the first time he noticed her eyes, sharp, intelligent, but carrying a sadness he couldn't place. From that day, he couldn't stay away. Before we continue, please kindly hit the subscribe button so that you will not miss true life stories like this. Nup Stories always have an emotional and irresistible story for you. The next few weeks became a quiet ritual Ethan secretly looked forward to more than anything else. Every Tuesday and Thursday morning, he walked across campus a little faster than he needed to, just to get to her class early. He always sat in the same seat, third row, left side, just far enough away that he wouldn't look like he was trying too hard, but close enough to watch her expressions when she spoke. The lecture hall itself was nothing special. Creaky wooden desks, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead, the faint smell of whiteboard markers lingering in the air. But when Dr. Elena Moore stepped into the room, the space felt different, alive. She had a quiet authority that didn't need to shout for attention. The room would naturally go silent, as if everyone sensed that what she was about to say actually mattered. Ethan had sat through plenty of professors droning about theories and philosophers long dead, but Elena made even the most complicated concepts feel urgent. When she spoke about morality, her voice would dip slightly, like she was inviting her students into a secret. When she asked questions about justice, her eyes would search the room like she was desperate for someone, anyone, to answer honestly. And when she spoke about betrayal, her voice carried something else, a heaviness, a tremor, like she knew the subject too well. Ethan couldn't explain it, but something about her presence made him feel seen. Really seen. Not as Richard Cole's son, not as the heir to Cole Global, with all the bodyguards, headlines, and expectations that came with it. No. Elena looked at him like he was just a man trying to figure out who he was, and she expected him to do better, be better, and he wanted to rise to that expectation. He started actually reading the assigned texts, not just skimming them, reading them. He stayed up late, highlighting passages, scribbling notes, thinking about her questions long after class was over. Sometimes he caught himself imagining what she might say about his life, about his father, about the weight of being born into a world you never asked for. He noticed little things about her, too. The way she'd absent-mindedly tap her pen against her notebook when deep in thought. The way she'd tuck her hair behind her ear when she was trying not to show she was flustered by a student's answer. The way her voice softened, almost broke when she said the word truth. By the 4th week, Ethan knew he wasn't just interested in philosophy anymore. He was interested in her. One Thursday evening, as the lecture ended and students began packing their bags, Ethan felt a strange, nervous energy in his chest. He could leave like everyone else and spend the rest of the night wishing he'd said something. Or he could stay. He stayed. As the last student filed out, Elena glanced up from the papers she was organizing and noticed him still sitting there. "You have another question?" she asked, her tone casual but her eyes curious. Ethan stood and walked slowly toward the front of the room, trying not to look as nervous as he felt. "Not about the class," he said carefully. Then after a pause, "About you." Her brows rose slightly, amused but also cautious. "About me? You always ask us what we do in impossible situations," Ethan said, his voice low. "What about you? Would you tell the truth if it meant losing everything?" For a second, there was a flash of surprise in her eyes. Then her smile faded, and something in her expression shifted like a shadow passing over her face. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she looked past him toward the windows, as if she were seeing something far away. When she finally spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "The truth has already cost me everything once," she said. And just like that, she gathered the rest of her papers and walked toward the door. Her heels clicked sharply against the floor, each sound echoing in the now empty hall. Ethan stood there, stunned, watching her disappear into the corridor. What did she mean by that? He stayed frozen for a long moment, his mind racing. Most professors would have brushed off a personal question like that with a polite laugh or a vague answer, but not Elena. Her words had weight, pain. And if the truth had cost her everything once, what did that mean? What truth was so dangerous, so costly, that it could take away everything from someone as strong as her? He couldn't stop thinking about it the entire walk back to his car. The night air was cool, crisp, filled with the faint hum of crickets and the distant sound of traffic from the city. But all Ethan could hear was her voice, replaying over and over in his head. By the time he got home, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to just sit in the 3rd row anymore and watch from a distance. He needed to know who she really was. He needed to know what she meant. And more than anything, he needed to know why. Despite all the warnings in her voice, he wanted to see her again more than ever. That night, Ethan returned to the Cole estate, a sprawling, perfectly manicured property perched on a hill overlooking the city. The mansion was massive, all glass and steel, with marble floors that clicked coldly underfoot, and hallways so wide they seemed designed to remind you just how small you were. To anyone else, it was a dream home. To Ethan, it often felt like a museum. Expensive art lined the walls, Picasso, Warhol, even a rare Basquiat. But there were no family photos, no messy shoe racks or signs of life. Every room looked staged, like it belonged in a magazine spread. Even the air felt curated, always chilled to the perfect temperature. Always faintly scented with imported lilies his stepmother insisted on ordering every Monday morning. He walked past the living room, where 2 staff members were adjusting fresh flowers on the table, and headed straight for his room to drop off his bag. From down the hall, he heard his father's voice, deep and sharp, carrying from the study. Ethan slowed his steps, the way he had since he was a kid whenever his father was in work mode. "Hostile takeover, lawsuits, bury them!" Richard Cole's voice snapped through the door. The usual. Cole Global had been in the middle of some high-stakes merger drama for months, and Richard seemed to thrive in it, fueled by conflict, by competition. Ethan could picture the scene without even opening the door. His father behind the mahogany desk, jacket off but tie still perfect, sleeves rolled to his elbows, glass of bourbon untouched beside him, stock reports spread out like battle plans. War room, always a war room. By the time dinner was served, Richard had finished his call and joined Ethan at the dining table. The table was long enough to seat 20, but it was just the 2 of them tonight, and silence hung between them like a third guest. The only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the soft hum of the chandelier overhead. "You're spending too much time at that university," Richard said finally, breaking the silence without looking up from his plate. He cut into his steak with surgical precision. Ethan glanced at him. "You sent me there. I sent you there to get a degree, Richard said, his tone sharp. Not to chase after professors. Ethan's fork froze midair, so he knew. His father's network was too good, his reach too long. There wasn't a corner of Ethan's life that Richard didn't have eyes on. She's just my professor, Ethan said carefully, trying to keep his voice neutral. But his heart thudded harder in his chest, betraying him. Richard finally looked at him, really looked at him, with that knowing, assessing gaze that made Ethan feel like a suspect under interrogation. Women like that always want something, Richard said evenly, as if reciting a universal truth. Don't be naive. Ethan clenched his jaw, heat rising under his skin. He hated this. Hated how his father reduced people to numbers, motives, transactions. As if kindness was just another business strategy. As if love was just a leverage point waiting to be exploited. She's not like that, Ethan said quietly, almost to himself. Richard set his knife down and leaned back in his chair, studying his son. You think you're the first young man to fall for someone older? Someone clever? Someone who makes him feel special? This isn't about, Ethan started, but his father cut him off with a wave of his hand. It's always about that. It's never about them, it's about you. Whatever you think you're feeling, it will pass. Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself not to lash out. The truth was, part of him wanted to shout at his father, to tell him he was wrong, that this was different, that Elena wasn't like the women who hovered around Cole Global's boardrooms with perfect smiles and hidden agendas. But another part of him, the part that had grown up in this house, learning to measure every word, stayed silent, because in this house shouting never won. Later that night, Ethan found himself in the library, a room he rarely used but often escaped to when he couldn't breathe in the rest of the house. The shelves were lined with leather-bound volumes his father probably hadn't touched in years, and the fire crackled softly in the marble fireplace. He sank into one of the armchairs and stared into the flames, thinking about Elena. The way her voice softened when she said the truth had already cost her everything. The look in her eyes when she said it. What had she lost? And why did his father's words feel like more than just a warning? Why did they feel like a threat? The next morning, Ethan joined his father for breakfast, a ritual Richard insisted on whenever Ethan was home. His father was already seated, scrolling through reports on a tablet, his coffee steaming beside him. You have a meeting with Davis at noon, Richard said without looking up. I know, Ethan replied. And you're attending the gala next Friday, Richard added. The board will expect you there. Ethan's chest tightened. The gala. A parade of power, money, and influence, exactly the kind of world he hated most. Exactly the kind of world Elena didn't belong in. She wouldn't come, Ethan murmured under his breath. Richard glanced up, narrowing his eyes. What did you say? Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Because even as he left the table, Ethan couldn't stop thinking about what it would mean if she did come. If she stood in this house, in this world, and faced the people who would judge her before she even spoke, would she still look at him the same way? Would she still believe he was different from all this? That evening, he pulled out his phone more times than he cared to admit, scrolling through the university directory until he found her email again. He almost typed something, anything, but stopped himself every time. What was he supposed to say? I can't stop thinking about what you said. I want to know what you lost. I want to know you. In the end, he didn't send anything. But when he went to bed, his dreams were filled with her voice, her words echoing over and over, louder than his father's warnings. And when he woke up the next morning, he knew he was in deeper than he'd ever meant to be. A week later, Ethan spotted her at the campus cafe. It was late afternoon, and the place was nearly empty, the golden light slanting through the tall windows and painting soft rectangles across the floor. The faint hiss of the espresso machine and the low murmur of a barista talking to a customer were the only sounds. Elena sat near the window, a mug of tea steaming in front of her, a worn paperback open in her hands. She was so focused, so still, that for a moment Ethan almost didn't want to disturb her. Almost. Can I join you? He asked, his voice soft but nervous. She looked up, startled, then hesitated. For a moment he thought she might say no, but then she closed her book and nodded toward the seat across from her. You're persistent, she said, and there was a trace of a smile on her lips. Ethan sat down, heart thudding. You said something the other day, he began carefully, that the truth cost you everything. What did you mean? Her expression shifted, guarded but not cold. She set the book down on the table, her fingers lingering on the cover as if it grounded her. There was a time, she said slowly, choosing each word like it might hurt, when I believed telling the truth was always the right thing. Always. no matter the consequences. Her eyes dropped to the table, tracing the wood grain with her fingertips. But when I expose someone powerful for doing something wrong, she let out a small, humorless laugh. My career almost ended overnight. My name was dragged through the mud. People I trusted turned on me. Her voice cracked just slightly on that last sentence, and she stopped talking, biting her lip. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. She wasn't just a professor. She wasn't just an academic behind a podium. She was someone who had been through a war and survived. "You're still here," he said quietly, almost reverently. "Yes." She looked up and met his eyes. "But some scars don't go away. Some you carry with you every day." For a moment, the air between them felt heavy, intimate, like something invisible had shifted. Ethan wanted to reach across the table and take her hand to let her know she wasn't alone. But he didn't. Not yet. Instead, he asked softly, "Why did you do it, if you knew it would cost you everything?" Her lips curved into the faintest, saddest smile. "Because it was the right thing to do," she whispered. "And because I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent." Her words hit him like a punch. Ethan had grown up in a house where silence was a strategy, where problems were handled behind closed doors, where truth was often just another piece of leverage. Hearing her say that made him wonder, what would it look like to live with that kind of integrity? What would it cost him? "I wish I had your courage," he said, surprising himself with how honest he sounded. "You do," she replied, her tone gentle but certain. "You just haven't had to use it yet." Their eyes locked, and suddenly the world outside the cafe, the traffic, the chatter, the clinking cups, seemed to fade. Ethan leaned back in his chair, trying to steady himself. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked. Elena took a sip of her tea before answering. "Every day," she admitted. "And yet not at all. It ruined parts of my life, but it also showed me who I really am." That struck him. He thought about his father, about the carefully managed world he lived in, a world where showing weakness was unacceptable, where reputation was everything, and where Ethan often wondered if he even knew who he was outside of the Cole name. "What did you lose?" he asked before he could stop himself. Her jaw tightened. "Friends, colleagues, the job I loved." She hesitated, then added softly, "Someone I loved." That last one landed like a weight in the pit of his stomach. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. The cafe felt impossibly quiet. Finally, Elena looked at him and said, "This is dangerous, Ethan." He blinked. "What is?" "This," she gestured between them. "Whatever it is you think you're looking for here." Ethan sat up straighter, his chest tightening. "I'm not looking for anything. I just want to understand you." She studied him for a long moment, as if trying to decide whether to believe him. "You're too young to be carrying other people's ghosts," she said gently. "Maybe I'm just tired of carrying my own," he said quietly. Her eyes softened, and for a moment Ethan thought she might actually cry, but she didn't. She reached for her book instead, fingers brushing the edge like she needed the familiar weight of it. "You should go," she said finally, her voice calm but not cold. Ethan's heart sank. But then, just as he started to stand, she added, "You can walk me to class tomorrow." His head snapped up, and she was already smiling faintly, a tiny concession that felt like a victory. "I'd like that," he said. That night, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. He couldn't stop replaying their conversation in his head, every word, every pause, every flicker of emotion in her eyes. Her story wasn't just about injustice, it was about survival. And for the first time, he found himself wondering what truth might exist inside his own family. Secrets buried under polished marble floors and perfectly staged dinners. He thought about his father's words, "Women like that always want something," and felt a spark of anger. Elena hadn't asked him for anything. She hadn't tried to manipulate him. She had been honest brutally, painfully honest, and that honesty had cost her everything, and somehow he admired her more for it. The next morning he arrived on campus early, waiting outside the philosophy building just as the sun broke over the horizon. When Elena walked up the path, her bag slung over one shoulder, she stopped when she saw him. "You're early," she said, a little surprised. "You said I could walk you," he replied. For a second, she just looked at him as if measuring how serious he was. Then she nodded. As they walked, the world felt strangely still. The campus was quiet at that hour, the trees rustling softly in the breeze, the morning air cool against their skin, and for the first time, Ethan felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The midterm project was announced on a rainy Monday morning. Students groaned at the workload, but Ethan barely heard them. The moment Elena said, "You can choose to work independently or schedule one-on-one sessions," he knew what he wanted. "Can I work with you after hours?" he asked after class, his voice calm but his chest pounding. Elena hesitated for a fraction of a second before nodding. "If you're serious about doing the work," she said. "I am," he replied, and he meant it. A few days later, they met in her office after dark. The campus was quiet at night, the kind of quiet that made every sound feel amplified. The hum of the fluorescent light above them, the distant footsteps of a janitor in the hallway, even the soft patter of rain against the windows, everything felt sharper, more intimate. Stacks of papers and books surrounded them, the smell of coffee lingering in the air. Elena sat across from him, her hair slightly loose from a long day, a pen twirling between her fingers. She was explaining something about moral frameworks, but Ethan wasn't hearing every word, not because he didn't care, but because he couldn't stop noticing her. The way the lamplight softened her face, the faint shadow of tiredness under her eyes, the way her voice dipped when she said something she cared about. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, low and soft like a warning. Ethan leaned back in his chair and asked quietly, "Do you ever wish you could start over?" The question seemed to catch her off guard. She turned to him slowly, her pen stilled in her hand, her eyes glistening with something he couldn't quite name. "Every day," she said almost in a whisper. The silence that followed was heavy, charged. Ethan's heart was hammering so hard he was sure she could hear it. And then, before he could think better of it, he said, "I think I'm falling in love with you." Her breath caught audibly. For a moment she didn't move, didn't even blink. Then she stood up abruptly, crossing the small office to the door. "Ethan, we can't do this," she said, her voice trembling in a way he'd never heard before. He rose to his feet too, his pulse roaring in his ears. "Why not?" "Because I am your professor." Her words were sharp, but her hands were shaking. "That's not the only reason," he said, stepping closer but careful not to cross the invisible line between them. She closed her eyes for a moment, gripping the doorknob like it was the only thing keeping her upright. "And because—" She swallowed hard, her voice breaking. "Because there are things about me you don't know. Things that could hurt you." Her words hit him like a punch, knocking the air out of his chest, but he didn't back down. "Then tell me," he said, his voice low but steady. Her eyes flicked to his, and for a brief second, he saw it. The war inside her. The part of her that wanted to tell him everything, and the part that was terrified of what would happen if she did. But she didn't tell him. Instead, she opened the door, her hand white-knuckled on the frame. "You should go," she said softly. "Is this really what you want?" he asked, his voice breaking now. She hesitated, just long enough to make him think she might change her mind, then said, "It has to be," and with that, she left him standing there in the middle of her office, the storm outside pounding against the windows like a mirror of the storm raging inside his chest. Ethan walked back to his car in the rain without an umbrella, not caring that he was soaked through by the time he reached the parking lot. Every drop that hit his skin felt like a question he couldn't answer. Why wouldn't she trust him? What could she be hiding that was so terrible? And why did he feel like this wasn't the end, but the beginning of something bigger, something neither of them could stop? When he got home that night, the mansion felt even colder than usual. Richard was still awake in the study, talking on the phone. Ethan could hear his voice through the door, calm, measured, ruthless. "Tell the board we settle only if they admit fault. Otherwise, we drag them through the courts until they beg for mercy." Ethan clenched his fists. He was tired of this world where everything was about leverage, power, control. He went to his room, shut the door, and sat on the edge of the bed staring at the floor. For the first time in a long time, he felt helpless. He wanted to fight for her. But how do you fight for someone who won't let you in? The next day, he went to class, half expecting her to avoid him. But when Elena walked in, her face was calm, composed, unreadable. She taught the lesson like nothing had happened, her voice steady, her eyes never lingering on him for too long. And yet Ethan could feel the tension between them like a live wire. Every glance, every pause, every question felt loaded, like they were speaking in a language only they could understand. When class ended, Ethan stayed in his seat waiting for everyone else to leave. When the last student walked out, Elena finally looked at him. Her expression softened just a little. "This is dangerous, Ethan," she said quietly, echoing the words she'd said in the cafe. "I know," he replied. And then he smiled, not recklessly, not arrogantly, but with quiet determination. "I'm not going anywhere." She didn't answer right away, but she didn't tell him to leave this time either. That night, Ethan lay awake, staring at the ceiling again. He thought about her words, things that could hurt you. What did she mean? Was she protecting him from her past? From herself? Or was she protecting herself from him? From what loving him might cost her? He didn't have the answers yet, but he knew one thing for certain. Whatever secret she was hiding, whatever lines they were crossing, he was already too far in to turn back. When Ethan got home that night, the house felt different. The lights were dim, the halls unusually quiet. He knew even before he reached the study that his father was waiting for him. Richard Cole sat behind his massive mahogany desk, jacket off but tie still knotted, a half-drunk glass of bourbon in front of him. He didn't look up right away, just held something in his hand, turning it slightly so that the lamplight glinted off the glossy surface. "You've crossed a line," Richard said finally, his voice low and dangerous. He held up the object, a photograph. Ethan's chest went tight. It was a candid shot of him and Elena leaving the campus cafe together. Ethan could see the moment frozen in time. Elena mid-step, her hair falling slightly across her face. Ethan walking beside her, looking at her like she was the only person in the world. "You're having me followed?" Ethan demanded, stepping forward, anger bubbling hot under his skin. "I am protecting you," Richard shot back, standing now, his voice rising. "Women like her." "Stop!" Ethan slammed his palm against the desk so hard the sound echoed through the study. "You don't know her," he said through clenched teeth. Richard's expression didn't change. "I know enough." His tone was sharp, surgical. And then he added almost casually, "You'll thank me when you find out who she really is." Those words landed like a blow. Ethan stared at him, his breath coming fast. "What do you mean?" Richard didn't answer right away. He swirled the bourbon in his glass, then set it down with deliberate calm. "You're my son," he said, "which means you have a target on your back whether you like it or not. People will use you to get to me, to get to my money, to get to my company. And this..." He held up the photo again. "This is exactly how it starts." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "She isn't like that," he said, quieter now but no less fierce. "You've known her 5 minutes. I know her enough to know she's not lying to me. She's not pretending. That's more than I can say for most people in this house." The words were out before he could stop them. Richard's jaw tightened. "This isn't a game, Ethan," he said finally. "You're young. You think this is about romance, about rebellion, about proving you're not me. But I've seen where this road leads." Ethan swallowed hard, forcing himself to meet his father's stare. "You don't get to control who I care about," he said. Richard's lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Care about whoever you want," he said. "But if you keep going down this path, you'd better be ready for the fallout." He tossed the photo onto the desk where it landed face up. Ethan picked it up, his fingers curling tightly around the edges, then turned without another word and walked out of the study. He didn't stop walking until he was outside, the night air cool against his overheated skin. He stood in the driveway, staring out at the city lights in the distance, the photo still in his hand. Richard's words echoed in his head. "You'll thank me when you find out who she really is." What did that mean? Was Richard bluffing, trying to scare him away, or did he actually know something about Elena? The thought made Ethan's pulse spike. He looked down at the photo again, at the quiet moment captured between him and Elena. No, he couldn't let this go. If his father knew something, he had to find out what it was, on his own. The next day, Ethan skipped his morning class and went to the campus library instead. He pulled up every record he could find on Dr. Elena Moore, old faculty bios, archived articles, public records. Hours passed as he pieced together fragments of her story. She had taught at another university years ago, had published several articles on ethics and whistleblowing. And then there was a gap, almost 2 years of nothing. No publications, no lectures, no public appearances. And then suddenly, she was here at this university, teaching again. Ethan leaned back in his chair, rubbing a hand over his face. What had happened during those 2 missing years? And why did she look at him the way she did whenever he asked about the truth? That night, he sat in his car outside her apartment building for nearly 20 minutes, debating whether to go up. Finally, he texted her. "Can we talk?" He stared at the screen until her reply came. "Tomorrow. My office, after class." Ethan exhaled, tension leaving his shoulders for just a moment. He didn't know what he was going to say, but he knew one thing for certain. He needed to hear the truth from her, not from his father, not from anyone else. Because whatever Richard was hinting at, Ethan wasn't ready to give her up. Not yet. Ethan left the mansion that night more determined than ever. The cool night air bit at his skin, but it didn't cool the fire burning in his chest. He didn't care about money. He didn't care about the coal empire, the stock prices, or his father's reputation. For once, none of it mattered. What mattered was the look in Elena's eyes when she said there were things about her he didn't know, things that could hurt him. What could possibly be so dangerous that she would rather push him away than tell him? As Ethan got into his car, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white, he made himself a promise. If Elena wouldn't tell him the truth, he'd find it himself, whatever it cost. And deep down, he already knew the answers waiting for him would change everything. The next day, Ethan stood outside Elena's office for a full minute before knocking. He could hear the faint rustle of papers inside, the occasional scratch of a pen. When she called for him to come in, he pushed the door open slowly, as if afraid the wrong move might shatter whatever fragile trust still existed between them. Dr. Elena looked up from her desk, surprise flashing across her face. She didn't tell him to leave. "You're persistent," she said finally, her tone unreadable. "I'm not here to make trouble," Ethan said softly, his voice steadier than he felt. "But I can't pretend this doesn't mean something. Not anymore." Her shoulders slumped slightly, as though the fight had drained out of her. "You think this is simple," she said, her voice low. "But you don't know what you're asking for." "Then tell me," Ethan said, taking a step closer, heart hammering. "Tell me who you really are." For a moment she looked like she might. Her lips parted, her eyes locked on his face as though searching for an answer she couldn't find. But then something flickered across her features, fear, or maybe regret, and she shook her head. "Not yet," she whispered. Before he could respond, she grabbed her coat and walked past him toward the door. But this time she hesitated with her hand on the knob. "Ethan," she said without turning around, "if you choose to keep coming back, you might lose everything." And then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hallway. Ethan stood there for a long time, staring at the empty doorway. Her warning should have scared him off. Instead, it made him want her more. He didn't go home right away. Instead, he wandered the campus, replaying every word in his mind. Her voice had been steady, but her hands... He had seen the way they trembled when she picked up her coat. She was afraid. Of what? Of him? Of his father? Of some secret that, if spoken aloud, would burn her life to the ground? Ethan sat down on a bench under the old oak tree near the quad. Students passed by, laughing, hurrying to class, living their ordinary lives. But for him, everything felt different now, as though he had stepped into a story he didn't fully understand. That night, Ethan dreamed about her. In the dream, she was sitting at her desk, the lamplight casting a warm glow across her face. She smiled at him, the kind of smile that made his chest ache. But when he reached for her, she turned into smoke, slipping through his fingers. He woke up with his heart pounding and the taste of her name on his tongue. The next few days became a quiet war inside him. He went to class, took notes, pretended to listen, but every time Elena walked into the lecture hall, he couldn't take his eyes off her. She avoided looking at him at first, keeping her gaze on the chalkboard, on her notes, on anyone but him. But slowly, something shifted. By the second week, she started to meet his eyes again, fleeting glances, quick enough that no one else would notice. By the third week, she lingered after class, as though waiting to see if he would stay too. He always did. One afternoon, the tension broke. The classroom had emptied, leaving only the echo of footsteps in the hallway outside. Elena stood at the front, gathering her papers into a neat stack. Ethan approached slowly, his pulse thudding in his ears. "You still haven't told me," he said quietly. She didn't ask what he meant. She just set the papers down and looked at him, really looked at him. "You think you're ready to hear it," she said, "but you're not." "Then help me be ready," he said, stepping closer. "Because this..." He gestured between them. "This isn't going away. I don't want it to." For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she did something she hadn't done before. She smiled. It was small, hesitant, but it reached her eyes. "You remind me of someone," she said softly. "Who?" "A boy I used to know," she said, her voice far away. "He believed the world was fair. That truth always wins. That people always do the right thing when it matters." "And what happened to him?" Ethan asked, leaning in. Her smile faded. "He grew up," she said. The silence between them stretched until Ethan could hardly breathe. Then, as if to break the spell, a loud crack of thunder echoed outside. The sudden downpour began, rain streaking down the windows. Elena glanced at the storm, then back at him. You should go, she said gently. You'll get caught in it. But Ethan didn't move. Elena, he said, his voice almost a whisper. I don't care if it's raining. I don't care if the whole world is against this. I just need you to tell me one thing. She waited. Is there any part of you, he asked, that wants this too? Her breath caught. For the briefest moment, her face was completely unguarded, every wall she had built between them stripped away. Yes, she said finally, so softly he almost didn't hear it. Lightning flashed outside, followed by another roll of thunder, and just like that she turned away, grabbing her bag. This doesn't change anything, she said quickly, her voice back to its careful, professional tone. But Ethan caught the flicker of something in her eyes as she passed him something that told him she was lying. He didn't follow her this time. Instead, he stood in the empty classroom, his heart hammering, a slow, determined smile spreading across his face. For the first time, he knew for sure she wanted this too, and if she wasn't ready to fight for it yet, he would be. Over the next several days, Ethan's determination hardened into resolve. He started asking quiet questions around campus, learning bits and pieces about Elena's past, where she had taught before, which colleagues she trusted, which ones she avoided. Every detail felt like a clue, another piece of a puzzle he was slowly assembling. He didn't know what the final picture would look like. But one thing was certain. He was done standing on the sidelines. If loving Elena meant losing everything, so be it. Later that evening, Ethan met his best friend Maya at a quiet downtown bar, the kind of place where the music was soft enough that you could actually hear yourself think. Maya was already there, sitting at the bar with a half-empty glass of whiskey in front of her. She raised an eyebrow as he slid onto the stool next to her. You look like hell, she said, studying his face. Thanks, Ethan muttered, signaling the bartender for a drink. Maya didn't smile. I mean it, E. You've got that look. The one you used to get right before you jumped off the roof into the pool when we were 12. Ethan gave a humorless laugh. This is a little different. Yeah, that's what I'm afraid of. She took a sip of whiskey, watching him carefully. She's not telling you the whole story. You don't even know her, Ethan shot back. I don't have to, Maya said evenly. I know you, and I know that look in your eyes. You're in over your head. She's not what my dad thinks she is. Maybe. Or maybe she's exactly what he thinks. Ethan's jaw tightened. Maya leaned in closer, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. Look, I'm not saying she's a bad person. I'm saying she's hiding something. And if you don't find out what it is, it could blow up in your face. Ethan stared into his glass, swirling the amber liquid. He didn't answer, but the seed of doubt had been planted. They sat in silence for a moment, the low hum of conversation around them filling the space. Maya reached over, resting a hand on his arm. E, I'm not trying to be the bad guy here. I've seen you get burned before. This isn't the same. Doesn't it bother you, she pressed, that every time you ask her about her past, she shuts down? That's not normal. Ethan's grip on the glass tightened. She's been through something, he said quietly. I can see it. I don't want to push her away before she's ready to tell me. Maya sighed, running a hand through her hair. You're a good guy, Ethan. But sometimes being a good guy means asking the hard questions before it's too late. Ethan finished his drink in one long swallow. Do you think I'm crazy? He asked. Maya's expression softened. No, I think you're in love, and that's exactly why you're not thinking straight. He let out a breath, half a laugh, half a sigh. Maybe you're right, he said, but I can't just walk away. Maya studied him for a long moment before nodding slowly. Then don't, she said finally. But promise me you'll be careful. Find out the truth, all of it, before you give her everything. Ethan nodded, though part of him already knew he was past the point of caution. As they left the bar, the city air was cool and damp, smelling faintly of rain. Maya pulled her jacket tighter around herself. Text me tomorrow, she said. Let me know you're alive. He smirked. Planning my funeral already? I just want to make sure you're not about to become a headline, she said, half joking, half serious. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets as they parted ways. Maya's words echoed in his head the whole drive home. She's hiding something. It could blow up in your face. That night, Ethan lay awake staring at the ceiling. His father's warning, Elena's trembling hands, Maya's worried eyes, they all swirled together into a storm inside him. He didn't want to believe Elena was dangerous, but he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was coming, something big enough to tear everything apart if he didn't get ahead of it. And so before he closed his eyes, Ethan made a decision. Tomorrow, he would stop waiting for answers to fall into his lap. He would find them, whatever it took. 2 nights later, Ethan couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, the kind of silence that made every creak of the floorboards sound like thunder. He tossed and turned until finally, with a frustrated sigh, he grabbed his phone from the nightstand. He hesitated for a moment, thumb hovering over the screen. He'd promised himself he wouldn't go digging behind Elena's back. But now, after his father's warning and Maya's quiet insistence that something wasn't right, he couldn't just ignore it anymore. He typed her name into the search bar. At first, nothing much came up, just the same dry academic bios he'd skimmed before. A couple of conference photos where she stood at a podium looking calm, professional, untouchable. But then he scrolled further. Buried deep in the search results was a headline that made his stomach lurch. Whistleblower exposes multi-million-dollar corporate fraud case ends in controversy. He tapped it open, his heart hammering. There she was. Her name, Dr. Elena Moore, right there in black and white. According to the article, she had been the key witness in exposing financial misconduct inside a major corporation. She had testified under oath, risking her career, her reputation, and everything she had worked for. At first, she had been hailed as a hero, but then the case collapsed. The company countersued, claiming her accusations were false and defamatory. She had spent 2 years fighting lawsuits, and though she eventually kept her position as a professor, her career had been left in tatters. Ethan sat back in bed, the glow of his phone screen casting sharp shadows across his face. Suddenly, Elena's words came back to him. The truth has already cost me everything once. She hadn't been exaggerating. But then his eyes caught on something else, a single line that made his blood run cold. The corporation she had testified against wasn't just some random company. It had direct ties to Cole Global. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Cole Global, his father's empire, the company that had built the mansion he lived in, paid for his education, and dictated nearly every decision in his life. His mind raced. Was Richard Cole involved? Did he know about Elena's testimony? Was this why he had been so adamant about keeping Ethan away from her? 1,000 possibilities spun through his head, each one worse than the last. He got out of bed and paced the room, running a hand through his hair. If his father had been involved, if Cole Global had been part of the fraud Elena had risked everything to expose, then this wasn't just about romance anymore. This was war. The next morning, Ethan drove to campus early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. He needed to see her. He needed to look her in the eye and ask her if it was true. All of it. When he reached her office, the door was closed. He stood there for a moment, torn between knocking and walking away. Then, before he could decide, he heard voices inside. He recognized Elena's voice, calm, controlled. But there was another voice too, deeper, male, sharp with anger. "You shouldn't even be teaching here," the man was saying. "You should have disappeared quietly after what you did." Ethan's chest went tight. He moved closer, pressing his ear to the door. "I didn't lie," Elena's voice snapped back. "You know what I saw." "Keep pushing," the man warned. "And next time, you won't just lose your job. People like Richard Cole don't forget." Ethan's breath caught. Richard Cole, his father's name. Before he could process it, the door opened, and a tall man in a gray suit stormed past him without a word. Elena froze when she saw Ethan standing there. "You heard?" she said quietly. Ethan swallowed hard. Who was that? Someone who thinks the past should stay buried. Her tone was flat, but he could see the fear in her eyes. He stepped into the office, shutting the door behind him. "You should have told me," he said. "It wouldn't have changed anything," she replied. "It changes everything," Ethan shot back. "You went up against a company tied to Cole Global, my father's company, and you think that doesn't matter?" Her lips pressed into a thin line. "That's exactly why I didn't tell you," she said finally. "Because I knew what it would do to you. I knew what it would do to him." Ethan stared at her, his heart pounding. "So it's true," he said. "Cole Global was involved." Her silence was all the answer he needed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The only sound was the rain beginning to patter against the window outside, soft and relentless. Finally, Elena looked up at him, her eyes glistening. "You have to understand," she said. "I didn't go looking for a fight. I just couldn't stay quiet when I saw what they were doing. People's lives were being destroyed. Families were losing everything while Cole Global made record profits. Someone had to speak up." Ethan felt something hot and bitter rise in his chest. Pride for her courage, anger at his father, fear of what this meant for them. All this time, he said slowly, he's been trying to keep me away from you. Not because of you, because of what you know. Elena nodded once. And if he finds out you know the whole truth. Her voice trailed off. She didn't have to finish the sentence. Ethan turned toward the door, his jaw set. I have to confront him, he said. No! Elena's voice was sharp now, urgent. He turned back to her, startled. If you go to him like this, without proof, you'll lose, she said. He'll spin it. He'll make it look like I manipulated you, like I'm just some gold-digging professor trying to turn you against him. Ethan hated that she was right. So what do I do? He asked, frustration boiling in his chest. You wait, she said. You stay calm, and you let me figure out how to finish what I started. Ethan stared at her, searching her face. You're still fighting them, he said. Elena didn't deny it. I can't let them win, she said softly. Not after what they did. When Ethan left her office, the storm outside had turned heavy, sheets of rain drumming against the pavement. He walked through it without caring, the water soaking his clothes, his hair plastered to his forehead. His father's empire suddenly felt like a stranger, something dark and towering, built on secrets and silence. And for the first time in his life, Ethan wasn't sure which side he was on. The next day, Ethan didn't wait for his first class to end before heading to Elena's office. He'd been up all night replaying their last conversation, the article he'd found, and the heated words between her and the man in the gray suit. This time there was no hesitation. He knocked once sharp, insistent, and when she called for him to come in, he stepped inside and shut the door behind him. Elena looked up from her desk, startled, a stack of papers in her hand. Ethan, she began, but he cut her off. You went after Cole Global, he said, holding up his phone with the article pulled up. His voice was low, but there was an edge to it. Her face went pale. The papers slipped from her hand and scattered across the desk. I didn't want you to find out like this, she whispered. So it's true? His voice cracked. Yes, she said finally, the word barely audible. It's true. Your father's company tried to bury evidence of corruption. I went public, and I paid for it with my reputation, my career, everything. Ethan's stomach turned, his grip on the phone tightening until his knuckles went white. You should have told me, he said. I wanted to, Elena admitted, her voice breaking, but was afraid you'd walk away. Wouldn't have, Ethan said, softer now. Not from you. For a long moment, they stood there staring at each other across the room, the silence heavy enough to press down on them both. Then Ethan crossed the space between them and reached out, taking her hand. I don't care what my father did, he said. I care about you. She closed her eyes and a single tear slipped down her cheek. When she opened them again, something inside her seemed to break loose. You have no idea what that case cost me, she said, her voice quiet but steady. I lost friends. Colleagues stopped talking to me. For 2 years I was dragged through court hearings, depositions, interviews designed to make me look like a liar. I almost lost my job. My name was in headlines next to words like fraud, defamation, unstable. Her hand trembled in his. I had to move cities, start over, keep my head down just to survive. And even now, even here, people still whisper behind my back. That man you saw yesterday, he wasn't exaggerating. If Cole Global thinks I'm stirring things up again, they'll make sure I disappear. Permanently this time. Ethan's chest tightened. He had grown up believing Cole Global was untouchable, a symbol of power and success. Hearing her describe it like a monster lurking in the shadows made him feel as though the ground beneath his feet had been pulled away. Why didn't you leave it alone? He asked before he could stop himself. Her eyes flashed, hurt and fierce all at once. Because I couldn't, she said. Because people were losing everything, their homes, their savings, while your father's company celebrated record profits. Someone had to speak up. Her words hit him like a punch. You're saying my father knew, Ethan said slowly. She hesitated. Yes, she said finally. Maybe not every detail, maybe not every decision, but Richard Cole signed off on the cover-up. He let it happen. Ethan turned away, running a hand over his face. He wanted to argue, to defend his father, but deep down he knew she wasn't lying. It explained everything, the way Richard had been watching him, the sudden obsession with keeping him away from Elena. It wasn't just about scandal, it was about control, and maybe, just maybe, about guilt. Elena, he said quietly, turning back to her. If what you're saying is true, if he was involved, then I need to hear it from him. Her eyes widened.
No?
Yes, Ethan said firmly. I can't just take this and stay quiet. I have to know exactly what he did and why. If you confront him now without proof, he'll deny everything, she said urgently. He'll make me look like a liar. Worse, he'll make you believe it. I wouldn't. You might, she cut in, her voice sharp now. He's your father, and Richard Cole doesn't lose. He will twist the truth until you don't know which way is up. Her fear was palpable, but so was her resolve. Then help me, Ethan said. Help me find the proof. I can't keep living like this, stuck between what you're saying and what he's telling me. For a long time she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. There's a paper trail, she said. Emails, financial records. I still have copies locked away, encrypted. But bringing them out now would mean going public all over again. It would mean risking everything for both of us. Ethan didn't hesitate. Then we risk it. She looked at him like she wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that he could handle what was coming. But part of her was still holding back, still bracing for him to run. You don't know what you're signing up for, she said softly. Then show me, he said. Show me everything. She crossed to her desk, opened the bottom drawer, and pulled out a slim black laptop. I shouldn't be showing you this, she said, typing in a long password before turning the screen toward him. File after file filled the screen, spreadsheets, internal memos, whistleblower reports with redacted names. Ethan scrolled through them in stunned silence. Numbers jumped out at him: diverted funds, falsified audits, payouts to silence former employees. And there, in the corner of one document, was the name he had been dreading. Richard Cole. Ethan sank into the chair opposite her desk, his throat tight. He knew, he said, barely above a whisper. He signed off on all of this. Elena closed the laptop and set it aside. Yes, she said. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Finally, Ethan looked up at her, his jaw set. Then we expose him, he said. Her breath caught. You realize what that means, she said. This isn't just about him. It's about the entire company. If this goes public, Cole Global will implode. Thousands of jobs will be affected. Your family name will be dragged through the mud. Ethan's gaze didn't waver. Then let it burn, he said. If everything my father built was built on this series, and then maybe it needs to come down. Elena stared at him, a mix of fear and admiration in her eyes. You're serious, she whispered. Yes, Ethan said. I'm done living in the dark. For the first time since he had walked into her office, Elena allowed herself a small, tired smile. Then we do this together, she said. When he left her office that day, the world felt different. The campus seemed sharper, louder, more alive, as if everything around him was bracing for the storm that was about to come. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt like he wasn't just Richard Cole's son. He was his own man, and he had chosen a side. That night, they walked together through the quiet campus, their steps echoing softly against the stone pathways. The lamps along the courtyard flickered, bathing them in pools of warm light, while the moon hung high and cold above them. It was late enough that the world felt almost empty, just the two of them walking side by side. Elena kept her hands clasped in front of her, as if holding herself together. Ethan noticed. I've been trying so hard to keep you at arm's length, she said finally, her voice low, almost swallowed by the night air. Ethan glanced at her, his chest tightening at the vulnerability in her tone. And I've been trying so hard to get closer, he said, a faint smile tugging at his lips. She stopped walking, turning toward him under the pale glow of the moonlight. This isn't simple, Ethan, she said. If anyone sees us like this, they won't, he said gently. And even if they did, I don't care. You should care, she said, frustration slipping through. You have everything to lose. Ethan took a step closer. Maybe that's what makes this real. For a moment they just stood there, their breath clouding faintly in the cool night air. The quiet between them stretched, and the weight of everything unsaid seemed to hang between them like a thread pulled tight. Then Ethan reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her face. His touch was tentative, but the look in his eyes was not. Elena, he said softly, like her name was a secret. Before she could answer, he kissed her gently at first, but with the kind of certainty that made her stop resisting. For a heartbeat she froze, caught between instinct and longing. Then she let go. Her hands found his shoulders, steadying herself as if she'd been holding her breath for years and could finally exhale. When they broke apart, the world felt changed, somehow quieter, more fragile. Elena stared at him, her lips parted, her heartbeat racing so hard she thought he might hear it. "This is a mistake," she whispered, though her voice trembled more with fear than conviction. "Then I don't care about being right," Ethan said, his thumb brushing lightly across her cheek. She looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years allowed herself to feel safe not because the danger was gone, but because someone had chosen to stand in it with her. They sat down on a stone bench beneath the old oak tree, still close enough that their shoulders touched. "I don't remember the last time I let someone in," Elena said quietly, staring out at the empty courtyard. "Not like this." "You don't have to go through this alone anymore," Ethan said. She turned to face him, her expression a mixture of hope and worry. "You say that now," she murmured. "But when this all blows up, when the press comes knocking and your father comes after me, will you still be here?" "Yes," Ethan said without hesitation. "I don't want a life where I have to choose between the truth and the person I care about. I'm done living like that." Her breath caught at the conviction in his words. "You're too young to sound so sure," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "Maybe I just grew up tonight." They stayed there for a long time, neither of them speaking, letting the quiet night wrap around them like a fragile truce. When they finally stood, Ethan walked her to the edge of the faculty parking lot. She paused before getting into her car, her hand lingering on the door handle. "Whatever happens next," she said, "you can't turn back once it starts." "I don't want to turn back," Ethan said. For a moment she searched his face, as if looking for one last reason to push him away. When she found none, she nodded. Then she got into her car and drove away, leaving Ethan standing under the moonlight breathless, determined, and more in love than ever. The next morning, Ethan was summoned to the Cole estate. He almost didn't go. Part of him wanted to stay away, to avoid another fight, but some stubborn part of him knew this moment was inevitable. He couldn't hide from his father forever. When he arrived, the house felt colder than usual. The marble floors echoed beneath his shoes as he made his way down the long hallway to the study. Richard was there, standing by the window with his back to the door, a crystal glass of scotch in his hand. Sunlight cut across the room, catching the sharp angles of his face when he finally turned. "You've made your choice," Richard said coolly, as though they were discussing business, not blood. "You chose her." Ethan didn't flinch. He didn't even sit down. "Yes," he said, "I did." Richard's jaw tightened. He set the glass down on the desk with a sharp clink and came around to face him fully. "Then understand this," he said, his voice dropping lower. "If you continue down this road, you are no longer my son. You will not inherit this company. You will not inherit a cent." The words landed like a physical blow, but Ethan stood his ground. "Then I'll build my own life," he said, each word deliberate. Something flickered in Richard's eyes, something like surprise, maybe even a glint of respect. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "You think you know who she is," Richard said slowly, crossing the room until he stood only a few feet away. "But there's more to her story than you realize. And when you learn the truth, you'll regret defying me." Ethan's pulse quickened. "She told me everything," he said. "About the case, about what your company did, about what you signed off on." Richard's lips curved into a cold, almost amused smile. "Did she tell you the whole story?" he asked. "She told me enough." "Did she tell you what happened after the case? Who she hurt? Who got caught in the crossfire because of her so-called truth?" Ethan hesitated. Richard's smile widened slightly, though there was no warmth in it. "Of course she didn't," he said, "because it would make her look less like the noble martyr you've made her out to be." Ethan felt anger rise in his chest hot and fast. "This isn't about her," he snapped. "This is about what you did. About the people you ruined to protect your company." Richard's expression hardened, his voice turning icy. "I did what I had to do," he said. "You think running a company like Cole Global is about playing fair? About being the good guy? It's about survival. It's about protecting thousands of employees, billions in assets, a legacy that your grandfather and I built from nothing. You have no idea what sacrifices have to be made to keep an empire standing." "Sacrifices?" Ethan shot back. "You mean lives, people's lives." Richard didn't flinch. "Yes," he said flatly. "Sometimes that's the price." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. For a moment, Ethan almost couldn't breathe. "This is exactly why I can't be you," he said finally. "Why I can't be part of this. Because somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing people as human beings and started seeing them as as numbers on a balance sheet. Richard's expression didn't change, but his silence was louder than shouting. "I don't want your money," Ethan said. "I don't want your company. I don't want any part of this if it means becoming the man you've turned into." Richard stepped closer, his presence filling the room. "You're making a mistake," he said, his voice quiet but sharp as glass. "You think you're standing up for love, for some ideal of justice, but she is not who you think she is. She has secrets, Ethan's secrets that will destroy you if you stay with her." Ethan's chest tightened, a flicker of doubt threatening to creep in. "What secrets?" he demanded. Richard turned away, walking back toward the desk. He picked up his glass again, swirling the amber liquid. "You'll find out soon enough," he said. "And when you do, I hope you remember this conversation." Ethan felt like the ground was shifting beneath his feet. "I don't need your warnings," he said. "I don't need your approval. Whatever she's hiding, whatever the truth is, I'd rather face it with her than live in your world, where truth is just another tool to use when it's convenient." Richard's jaw flexed. "You're throwing away your future for a woman you barely know," he said, his voice rising now. "For someone who won't even tell you everything." "Then I'll find out the rest myself," Ethan said. Father and son stood there, staring at each other, two stubborn men from the same bloodline, neither willing to back down. Finally, Richard's expression hardened into something final, like a door closing. "Then get out," he said. "You want to play hero? Do it without my name, without my money. From this moment on, you are on your own." Ethan didn't move at first. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Then he nodded once. "Fine," he said. "I'd rather be broke and free than rich and owned." He turned and walked out, each step heavier than the last, but with a strange growing clarity. When he reached the front door of the mansion, he stopped for a moment, looking back over his shoulder at the house he had grown up in. For years, it had felt like a gilded cage. Now it just looked empty. He stepped outside and let the door close behind him, the sound echoing through the hall like the final note of a song. Out in the driveway, Ethan got into his car, gripping the steering wheel until his hands ached. Richard's warning replayed in his mind on a loop. "There's more to her story than you realize." For the first time, a shadow of doubt flickered in him. He loved Elena, but what if there really was something she hadn't told him? Something worse than the case? The thought gnawed at him all the way back to campus. By the time he parked outside Elena's building, his determination had hardened into something new. He was going to find out the whole truth no matter what it cost. Later that night, Ethan and Elena sat across from each other at a small Italian restaurant tucked into a quiet side street. The place smelled of garlic and fresh basil, the low hum of soft jazz playing in the background. For the first time in days, Ethan felt like they were just two people on a date, not fugitives from the weight of the world. Elena was laughing softly at something he had said, the lines of tension around her eyes easing just a little. When a shadow fell across their table, both of them looked up. A man in a dark coat and baseball cap stood there, his face partially hidden by the dim light. He didn't smile, didn't introduce himself. Instead, he placed a brown envelope on the table in front of Ethan and said just one thing. "Read this before it's too late." Then he walked away, slipping out the door and disappearing into the night as quickly as he had come. Ethan stared after him, a chill crawling down his spine. "Who was that?" Elena asked, her brows knitting together. "I don't know," Ethan said slowly, his fingers already reaching for the envelope. "Ethan..." Elena's tone carried a warning, but he had already opened it. Inside were a stack of documents, court transcripts, corporate emails, grainy photographs. Ethan's heart pounded as he sifted through them. Some of the pages painted Elena as a liar, emails suggesting she had manipulated witnesses during the whistleblower case, pushing them to go public even when they were reluctant. Other pages hinted at something far more dangerous, a possible connection between Elena and Richard Cole's biggest business rival, a man named Martin Crane. There were even photos of Elena standing in the lobby of Crane's headquarters, sitting across from him at what looked like a private dinner. Ethan's head spun. He glanced up at Elena, who was watching him closely, her expression unreadable. "This isn't true, right?" he asked, holding up one of the pages. Elena's eyes narrowed. "Let me see that." But Ethan hesitated. For the first time since this started, a sliver of doubt slid into his chest like ice. "What if it is?" he said quietly. Elena's face changed, hurt flashing across it before she masked it with cool composure. "So that's what this is," she said softly. "Someone wants you to start doubting me." "Can you blame me?" Ethan shot back louder than he meant to. "You've kept things from me before. My father warned me there was more to your story, and now this shows up out of nowhere. I don't know what to believe." The restaurant suddenly felt too small, too warm. The air between them was thick with tension. Elena leaned back, crossing her arms. "Then ask me," she said. "Instead of assuming the worst, ask me." Ethan's throat was dry. "Were you working with Martin Crane?" he asked finally, his voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, Elena didn't answer. Then she said, "Yes, but not the way this makes it look." Ethan's heart skipped a beat. "Explain," he said. "I went to Crane because he was the only one willing to help me when your father's company tried to destroy me," Elena said, her voice sharp now. "He gave me access to lawyers, to evidence I never could have gotten on my own. But it wasn't about revenge, Ethan, it was about justice." "Do you have proof of that?" Ethan asked, gesturing to the documents. "Because right now this makes it look like you were playing both sides." Helena's jaw tightened. "I don't have to prove anything to you," she said, standing abruptly. "If you think a few anonymous papers are enough to erase everything I've told you, everything we've been through, then maybe you don't know me as well as you think." Her words hit like a slap. "Elena," Ethan began, but she was already reaching for her coat. "I need some air," she said, her voice softer now but laced with pain. She walked out of the restaurant, leaving Ethan sitting there with the envelope in front of him, his chest a storm of confusion. He looked down at the documents again. Who sent them? Why now? If this was a setup, it was perfectly timed to hit him where it hurt most, right after he'd chosen Elena over his father. Right when he thought he finally knew the truth. Ethan gathered the papers back into the envelope, but one photo slid out and fell onto the table. It was the clearest picture yet, Elena and Crane, their heads bent close together. Crane smiling like a man who had just won something. Ethan shoved the photo back into the envelope and tossed some cash on the table before hurrying outside. But Elena was already gone. The night air was cold, biting at his skin as he stood there on the sidewalk clutching the envelope. For the first time, he wondered if his father might have been right. And that thought terrified him more than anything. The restaurant suddenly felt smaller, the warm glow of the candles now harsh against Ethan's skin. He sat frozen, the man's cryptic words echoing in his ears as he stared at the envelope on the table. Elena reached for his hand. "Ethan, what is it?" He didn't answer right away. His fingers worked at the flap, pulling out the papers inside. The sound of shuffling documents seemed deafening in the quiet restaurant. "What is that?" Elena asked, her voice tight. "Something I guess I was meant to see," Ethan said, his throat dry. He flipped through the pages, court transcripts, internal emails from the whistleblower case, photographs taken without Elena's knowledge. His stomach dropped as he spotted one that showed Elena sitting across from Martin Crane, Richard Cole's most ruthless business rival. Crane was smiling like a man who had just sealed a deal. Ethan's pulse hammered in his ears. "Elena." His voice was barely above a whisper. "What is this?" She frowned, her shoulders stiffening. "Let me see." But Ethan didn't hand the papers over. "Answer me first, were you working with Crane?" For a moment she said nothing. Then slowly she nodded. "Yes, but not the way this makes it look." Ethan felt the air leave his lungs. "Then how does it look?" His voice was sharper now, cutting through the warm, intimate atmosphere like glass. Elena's jaw tightened. "I went to Crane for help after Cole Global tried to bury me. He had access to evidence your father didn't want anyone to find. He was the only one willing to stand with me when everyone else turned their backs." Ethan slammed the papers down on the table. "So my father was right. You did go to the enemy." Her eyes flashed with anger. "Your father isn't some innocent victim, Ethan. He destroyed lives to protect his empire. Crane might not be a saint, but he gave me a chance to fight back." The other diners were starting to notice, but neither of them cared. "This isn't just about the case anymore," Ethan shot back, his voice low but fierce. "You should have told me. You let me stand up to my father without knowing the whole truth." Elena flinched at that, guilt flickering across her face. "I didn't tell you because I knew this would happen," she said, her voice quieter now. "You'd look at me like I'm some kind of traitor." Ethan's jaw worked as he tried to process everything. His father's warning echoed in his mind. "You think you know who she is, but there's more to her story than you realize." And now here was proof, or at least something that looked like proof. "I need to think," he said finally, his voice flat. Elena's face fell, but she didn't try to stop him when he stood. "Ethan," she started, but he was already reaching for his coat. He looked back at her once, seeing the pain in her eyes, but his mind was spinning too fast to stay. I can't do this right now, he said before walking out of the restaurant into the cold night air. Outside, the city felt strangely quiet. The envelope was still in his hand, its weight like a stone. Every instinct screamed at him to run back inside, to tell her he believed her, to forget everything. But another part of him, the part that had grown up watching his father win battles by being ruthless, knew he couldn't afford blind faith. If Elena really was hiding something, he needed to know before he gave her his heart completely. That night, Ethan sat awake in his apartment, the documents spread across the table. The emails looked real. The photos looked damning. But there was something about them that nagged at him, a detail he couldn't quite place. Maybe they weren't telling the whole story. Maybe someone wanted to drive a wedge between them. But who? And why now? Ethan rubbed his face with his hands, exhaustion crashing over him. He wasn't ready to give up on Elena, but he also couldn't ignore the possibility that the woman he was falling for was connected to his father's greatest enemy. By the time dawn broke, Ethan had made a decision. If Elena wouldn't tell him everything, he'd find out the truth himself no matter what it cost. Richard Cole did not like surprises, and when he got one, the entire Cole estate felt it. The call came just after sunrise. Ethan was still in bed when the housekeeper knocked softly on his door. "Your father wants to see you," she said quietly. Her eyes flickered with something he couldn't place. Pity, maybe. Ethan threw on a shirt and made his way down the long marble hallway toward the study. The heavy oak door was already ajar, the warm glow of the fireplace casting long shadows across the room. Richard was there, standing with his back to the door, a crystal glass in his hand, though it was far too early for scotch. The brown envelope was on the desk in front of him. "How did you get that?" Ethan asked, his stomach tightening. Richard turned, his face calm in a way that made Ethan more uneasy than if he had been shouting. "I have eyes everywhere, Ethan. Did you really think you could keep something like this from me?" "It wasn't yours to know," Ethan shot back, stepping fully into the room. "This is between me and Elena." Richard's lips twitched into something between a smile and a sneer. "You still call her Elena. Interesting." Ethan clenched his jaw. "What do you want?" Richard didn't answer right away. Instead, he picked up the file and tossed it onto the desk so it landed with a heavy slap. "What I want," he said finally, "is for you to look at this. Really look at it and tell me you still trust her." Ethan glanced at the envelope but didn't move closer. "I already saw it. Then you know she's been lying to you." "No," Ethan said sharply. "I know there's more to the story than what's in there." Richard let out a dry laugh. "You sound just like your mother, always looking for the good in people who don't deserve it." That stung more than Ethan wanted to admit. "She risked everything to tell the truth," Ethan said, his voice rising. "You tried to bury her, Dad. You and your lawyers and your PR teams, you made her the villain so you could stay untouchable." Richard's eyes went cold. "I protected this family. I built something that will outlive all of us. And I will not let you throw it all away because some woman knows how to cry on cue." Ethan took a step closer, his hands curling into fists. "She's not pretending. She lost everything because she went up against you. She chose her side," Richard said flatly, "and now you've chosen yours." The words hung in the air like a sentence being passed. At that moment, the study door opened and Elena stepped inside. Ethan's breath caught. She looked as if she hadn't slept in days, her dark hair pulled back hastily, her eyes rimmed red. But her posture was steady, her chin lifted with quiet defiance. "Mr. Cole," she said, her voice cool, "I thought it was time we stopped letting other people tell this story for us." Richard's gaze sharpened. "You have some nerve coming here." "I didn't come for you," she said evenly. "I came for him." Her eyes flicked to Ethan, softening for just a moment. Ethan's chest ached. This was the moment he'd been dreading. The collision of two worlds he had tried to keep separate. Richard moved around the desk, his presence filling the room like a storm front. "Do you have any idea what she really is, Ethan? What she's done?" "Yes," Ethan said before Elena could speak. "I know enough, and I know you tried to destroy her for telling the truth." "That's not the truth," Richard barked, his composure finally cracking. "She leaked confidential documents to Martin Crane, my enemy. She gave him the ammunition he needed to launch a war against this family." Ethan turned to Elena. "Is that true?" Elena's eyes glistened, but her voice didn't waver. "Yes, but not because I wanted to hurt you. Because it was the only way to expose what your father's company was doing. Richard slammed his hand on the desk so hard the glass rattled. You see? She admits it. Ethan's heart was pounding so loudly he could barely hear anything else. He looked from his father to Elena, feeling as if the ground was shifting beneath his feet. Ethan, Elena said softly, stepping closer. I didn't want you to find out like this, but everything I've done, every choice, was to stop something that was wrong. If that makes me your father's enemy, then so be it. But I have never lied to you about how I feel. The room was silent except for the crackle of the fire and the heavy thud of Ethan's heartbeat. He felt torn clean in half. On one side was the man who had raised him, who had built his entire world on the other. The woman who had shown him what it meant to truly see someone, to fight for something that mattered. Richard's voice cut through the silence. You have one chance, Ethan. Walk away from her now and this stays between us. Stay with her, and you're no longer my son. Ethan's pulse roared in his ears. Helena stood perfectly still, tears sliding silently down her face. This was it, the moment everything would break. The silence in the study was suffocating, as though even the fire dared not crackle. Ethan stood frozen, the leather-bound file heavy in his hands. He could hear nothing but the rapid thud of his own heart, as if his body already knew what his mind refused to process. Richard leaned back against the desk, his presence like a shadow swallowing the room. Go on, he said coolly. Read it. See for yourself. Ethan's fingers felt clumsy as he pulled the file open. The papers smelled of ink and stale dust, as if they'd been waiting for years just to ruin this moment. Inside were photographs. Elena sitting across from Thomas Greer at a quiet cafe. Elena handing a manila folder to a courier. Elena outside a courthouse looking pale, but determined. Each image felt like a blow. He flipped to the next section. Legal documents, signed affidavits, transcripts of testimony. Emails printed out in black and white, showing Elena's name on messages sent to Greer's legal team. Richard's voice cut through the stillness, calm but sharp. She wasn't just a whistleblower, he said. She wasn't some innocent professor caught in a storm. She was the storm. She worked with Thomas Greer, the man who tried to take everything from us. She fed him information. She gave him ammunition. Ethan's stomach twisted as he turned another page and saw dates meetings scheduled over several months, lining up perfectly with the period when Cole Global was under investigation. He looked up, his throat dry. Elena. His voice cracked on her name. Is this true? She didn't look away. Her eyes glistened, tears threatening to fall, but her voice was steady. Yes, she said softly. The word hit him harder than any punch could. Yes? Ethan repeated, as if saying it again would make it sound different. Richard's face was a mask of grim satisfaction. You see now? You see what she really is? But Ethan didn't look at his father. His eyes stayed locked on Elena's, desperate for something, anything that would make this make sense. Why? He asked, the word barely more than a whisper. Elena took a step forward, her hands trembling but her chin high. Because I had no choice, Ethan. Because your father's company was covering up crimes that ruined lives. Because the truth had to come out. And no one else had the courage to do it. That doesn't explain this, Ethan snapped, slamming the file shut. Meeting with Greer, giving him information. You knew what he wanted. He didn't care about justice. He cared about destroying my father. Her tears finally spilled over. I know, and I hated it. But without him, I never would have gotten the evidence to prove what Cole Global did. No one else would touch the case. Everyone was too afraid. Richard scoffed, his voice cold. Spare us the morality play. You were perfectly happy to cozy up to my enemy as long as it served you. Elena's eyes flashed with anger. I wasn't happy about it for a second, but someone had to stand up to you. Someone had to stop you. The words hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. Ethan felt his chest tighten. He didn't know where to put his rage. At his father, who had buried evidence and painted Elena as a liar. Or at Elena, who had kept her alliance with Greer a secret even as she stood in front of his class every week, looking at him like she saw him. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. The firelight cast his shadow long across the floor, a fractured silhouette. I trusted you, he said finally, his voice breaking. I defended you. I stood up to my father for you. And the whole time, you were keeping this from me. Elena took another step closer, her voice pleading now. I kept it from you because I didn't want to lose you. Because I knew if you saw those files before I could explain, you'd think exactly what you're thinking right now. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes burning. And how am I supposed to think anything else? Everything here says you used me, that you got close to me to finish what you started. Her breath caught, as if the words had physically hit her. That's not true, she said, her voice shaking. I never used you. Whatever this is between us, it's real, Ethan. It's the one thing in my life that has been real. Richard stepped forward, his voice hard as iron. Don't listen to her, this is what she does. She spins the truth until you can't tell which way is up. She's been playing this game for years. Ethan's head pounded. His father's words and Elena's words collided in his mind, both of them fighting for dominance. Enough, he shouted, the sound startling even himself. The room went dead silent again, save for the faint hiss of the fire. Ethan's breath came fast and shallow. He looked at Elena, then at his father. Two people who had shaped his entire world, one by building it, the other by shaking it to its core. He felt the weight of the decision pressing down on him, heavier than the coal empire, heavier than the name he had carried all his life. If he walked away from Elena now, he might salvage what was left of his family, his inheritance, his place in the empire. But if he chose her, truly chose her, he would lose everything else. And yet, he thought of her voice in the cafe when she told him that the truth had already cost her everything. He thought of the way she had looked at him under the moonlight, not like the son of Richard Cole, but like someone worth loving. Slowly, he put the file back down on the desk. I need the whole truth, he said finally, his voice calm but unyielding. Not from you, he added, looking at Richard. And not from these papers. From her. Alone. Richard's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Elena met Ethan's gaze, her expression unreadable for a long, tense moment. Then she nodded. Fine, she said. You want the whole truth? I'll give it to you. But when I do, Ethan, you won't see the world the same way again. The room seemed to tilt, the fire throwing long, eerie shadows across their faces. Ethan's heart thudded once, twice, like a drum summoning him to battle. Then tell me, he said. And with that, Elena took a deep breath and began to speak. But then Elena stepped forward, her voice steady despite the tears glistening in her eyes. Yes, I met with Thomas Greer, she said, her tone unwavering. Yes, I gave him information, but not to hurt your family, Ethan, to stop them. Richard's face darkened, his jaw clenching like stone. Lies, he snapped, his voice sharp enough to cut through the air. But Elena didn't even flinch. She turned to Ethan, her eyes burning with urgency. Your father's company was about to finalize a deal that would have destroyed entire towns. Factories shut down, thousands of workers laid off with no severance, pensions wiped out. I had proof. I went to Greer because he was the only one powerful enough to fight Coal Global and stop it. Ethan's mind spun, images crashing together. His father on late-night calls talking about hostile takeovers and burying the competition. Elena's voice cracking that night in the cafe when she told him the truth had already cost her everything. He turned to Richard, his chest tight. Dad. Is that true? Richard's jaw tightened. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he took a slow step toward his son, his presence heavy, almost suffocating. You don't understand what it means to build something like this, he said finally. Business isn't about kindness, Ethan. It's about survival. About making hard choices so that the company and the family stays strong. Ethan's hands curled into fists. Hard choices? You call ruining people's lives a hard choice? Richard's eyes flashed. I call it necessary. But before Ethan could respond, Elena stepped closer and gently placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm, grounding, as if pulling him back from the edge. I didn't betray you, she said softly. I was trying to do the right thing. I risked everything because I couldn't let innocent people pay the price for your father's greed. Richard finally turned his icy stare on her. You ruined this family's reputation. You made us look weak. Ethan's anger flared hot. She saved people's lives, he shot back, his voice reverberating through the room. Richard's lip curled. You sound just like her, he spat, as though it were the worst insult imaginable. Elena took a step forward, meeting Richard's glare head-on. Maybe he should. Because the truth is, Richard, I wasn't just some random professor you happened to cross paths with. You already knew me. Ethan froze. What? Richard's face went still, the mask of control finally cracking. You knew me, Elena said again, her voice sharper now, charged with years of pent-up fury. 8 years ago, I was a junior analyst in your company. I believed in Cole Global. I believed in you. And then I discovered the numbers didn't add up, that the project you were pushing would bankrupt half a dozen smaller suppliers and leave hundreds without work. I brought it to you quietly, thinking you'd want to fix it. Her voice broke for the first time, but she forced herself to continue. You fired me. You blacklisted me. You made sure I couldn't get a job anywhere in the industry again. That's why I became a professor, because you left me no choice. Ethan's head whipped toward his father. You did that? Richard's silence was all the answer he needed. Elena's eyes glistened with unshed tears. You took my career. You took my name and dragged it through the dirt. You made me an example to anyone else who might think about speaking up. Richard finally spoke, his voice like steel. I did what I had to do to protect this company, to protect this family. No, Elena said fiercely. You did it to protect yourself. The room seemed to hum with tension, the fire throwing long, jagged shadows across the walls. Ethan felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff. The truth was no longer just about his father's business deals or Elena's secret meetings. This was personal. This was a war that had started long before he had ever stepped foot in Elena's classroom. Elena, he said, his voice rough, why didn't you tell me this sooner? She turned to him, her expression softening. Because I wanted you to know me for who I am now. Not the woman who was destroyed by your father's company. I wanted you to see me as more than my past. Ethan's chest ached. He saw her then. Not just as the professor who had captivated him, not just as the whistleblower who had gone up against his family, but as a woman who had been broken and had clawed her way back to standing. Richard stepped closer, his tone low, dangerous. If you stay with her, Ethan, you are choosing her over everything I have built. Over me. Ethan looked at his father, then at Elena. The weight of generations of legacy pressed down on him. I didn't ask you to choose, Elena whispered. I just asked you to see the truth. Richard's voice cut in, sharp as glass. And what happens when she decides to leak your secrets next, Ethan? When she decides that you are the problem? But Ethan shook his head slowly. That's the difference between you and me, Dad. I'm not afraid of the truth. The silence that followed was deafening. Richard's jaw worked, his face dark with barely contained fury. Finally, he said in a voice like ice, Then you're no longer my son. The words hung in the air, final and brutal. Ethan's breath caught, but he didn't look away. Then I'll build my own life, without you, without your money, without your empire. Richard's eyes narrowed, but there was something else there now, something that looked almost like regret. You'll come back, he said quietly. When she leaves you, when you realize you threw everything away for nothing. But Ethan didn't answer. He turned back to Elena, reaching for her hand. Her fingers curled into his, and for the first time since he had opened that file, he felt steady. We're not running, Ethan said, looking at Richard one last time. We're building something better. And with that, he walked out of the study, Elena by his side, leaving the Cole empire and everything it represented behind him. That night they stood outside the mansion, the night air cool against their skin. Are you sure? Elena asked softly, searching his face. Ethan nodded. For the first time in my life, yes. She let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding, and in that quiet moment, with the stars scattered above them like witnesses, Ethan realized that the cost of the truth had been high, but the price of silence would have been higher. The room seemed to hold its breath as Ethan stood between his father and the woman he loved. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, the only sound in the tense silence. Elena's tear-streaked face glistened in the flickering light, her breath shallow as she waited for him to speak. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. His hands rested on the file, the weight of its contents pressing down on him like a mountain. This was it, the moment that would define who he was and what kind of man he would become. Then, with a quiet resolve that surprised even himself, Ethan closed the file and pushed it back across the table. I don't care about your empire, he said, his voice steady, calm. I care about the truth. And if you can't see that, then maybe it's not Elena who's betrayed this family. Richard's face hardened, the muscles in his jaw working. You'd throw away your inheritance for her? Yes, Ethan said simply, without hesitation. The word landed in the room like a thunderclap. Elena gasped softly, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. She pressed a hand to her lips, as if she couldn't believe what she'd just heard. Richard stared at his son for a long, heavy moment, his eyes cold but unreadable. Then he turned away, walking slowly toward the window. His silence said more than words ever could. "You think this is about love," Richard said finally, his back still to them. "But it's not. This is about weakness, about letting emotion rule over logic. That's not how I built this empire." Ethan took a step forward, his voice firm. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe this empire was built on fear instead of trust. Maybe it's time someone broke the cycle." Richard turned then, his eyes blazing. "You think you can do better than me?" "I think I have to try," Ethan said quietly, "even if it means starting from nothing." For a moment, Richard said nothing. Then, with a bitter laugh, he sank into his chair. "You'll regret this. One day when she leaves you, when the world chews you up and spits you out, you'll remember this night. And you'll wish you had stayed." But Ethan didn't back down. He reached for Elena's hand, their fingers interlocking. "If that day comes, at least I'll know I made my choice for the right reasons. I can live with that." Elena's tears fell silently now, but there was a new light in her eyes. Pride, relief, and something that looked a lot like hope. Richard looked at them both for a long time, then turned his chair toward the fire. "Get out," he said finally, his voice flat. Ethan hesitated just a moment, then nodded. "Goodbye, Dad." He led Elena out of the study, their footsteps echoing down the hallway like the closing of a chapter. Outside, the night air was cool and crisp, the stars bright above them. Elena stopped on the front steps, turning to face him. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. "Yes, I did," Ethan said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "Because if I stayed, I'd be living his life, not mine. And I'm done letting him decide who I get to be." Elena let out a shaky breath, and for the first time in years her shoulders seemed to loosen, the weight she'd been carrying finally lifting. "You just gave up everything," she said softly. Ethan smiled faintly. "Not everything, I still have you." Her lips trembled, and before she could stop herself, she threw her arms around him. He held her tightly, his chin resting against her hair. "This isn't going to be easy," she murmured against his chest. "Nothing worth it ever is," he said. The following days were a blur. Ethan packed what little he had left at the estate and moved into a small apartment near the university. It wasn't much, bare walls, second-hand furniture, but it was his. Elena visited often, sometimes bringing takeout, sometimes just sitting with him in the quiet. They talked late into the night, sharing stories, fears, and dreams they had never spoken aloud before. And slowly Ethan began to feel something he hadn't felt in years: freedom. One evening a knock came at the door. When Ethan opened it, he was startled to see Richard standing there. "Dad?" Richard looked older, wearier than Ethan had ever seen him. "May I come in?" Ethan hesitated, then nodded. Richard stepped inside, glancing around the modest apartment. "So this is where you've been hiding." "I'm not hiding," Ethan said evenly. Richard nodded slowly. "I came to say, I still think you're making a mistake, but you're still my son, and if you ever change your mind, the door is open." Ethan studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "Thank you." Richard's eyes lingered on him for a long moment before he turned to leave. When the door closed, Ethan let out a long breath. "That was something," Elena said quietly. "Yeah," Ethan said, a small smile tugging at his lips. "But this time, I didn't let him decide for me." Elena smiled back, and in that moment Ethan knew that even though he had walked away from everything he had been born into, he had stepped into something far greater, a life of his own making. That night, as he lay awake beside Elena, Ethan thought about the empire he had left behind, the battles that had been fought, and the truth that had finally been brought to light. For the first time, he felt at peace. That night, Ethan and Elena walked through the empty campus hand in hand. The world felt strangely quiet, as though it too was catching its breath after everything that had happened. The lamplight cast long shadows across the cobblestone path, and their footsteps echoed in the silence. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, her voice carrying a weight that hadn't lifted even after the storm with Richard. "I never wanted to come between you and your family." "You didn't," Ethan said, giving her hand a gentle squeeze. "You just showed me who my family really is." They stopped under a street lamp, its golden glow softening the tears that still lingered in Elena's eyes. Ethan turned to face her, his expression calm, but full of something she hadn't seen before: certainty. "For the first time in my life," he said, "I feel like I'm living for something real." Elena's breath hitched. She smiled through her tears, a fragile smile at first, then one that deepened into something genuine. For the first time in months, she let herself believe they could have a future together. The weeks that followed were a blur of change. Ethan officially moved out of the Cole estate, packing what few things he truly owned into boxes. The movers offered to take more: the expensive suits, the paintings, the things his father had chosen for him. But Ethan shook his head. He didn't want them. Everything about this next chapter of his life had to be his choice, not his father's. Elena helped him set up his small apartment. The first night they sat on the floor eating pizza from the box, surrounded by half-unpacked cartons, Elena laughed, really laughed for the first time in what felt like years. "I can't believe this is your life now," she teased, looking around at the mismatched furniture and bare walls. "It's not much," Ethan admitted, grinning, "but it's mine." And somehow, that made it better than anything he had before. But the outside world wasn't done with them. News of the confrontation between Ethan and Richard leaked to the press. Headlines read, "Billionaire heir walks away from Cole empire. Professor at center of Cole family feud." Reporters waited outside the university, hoping to catch a glimpse of them. Some tabloids painted Elena as a manipulative gold digger. Others called Ethan reckless, naive, doomed to fail. Ethan ignored them, but Elena, she struggled. One evening as they sat in his apartment, she confessed, "I thought I was done being dragged through the mud. I thought I could just teach and be left alone." "You didn't ask for any of this," Ethan said softly, taking her hands. "But you faced it anyway. And you're not facing it alone this time." Elena looked at him, tears brimming in her eyes. "You really mean that, don't you?" "I do," Ethan said, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I didn't choose an easy life. I chose you, and I'll choose you again tomorrow and the day after, for as long as you'll let me." Elena's throat tightened, but she nodded. "Then I guess we fight this together." Maya, Ethan's best friend, came to visit one afternoon, curious to see for herself if Ethan had truly lost his mind. "You look different," she said, studying him as they sat on the small balcony. "Different how?" Ethan asked. "Calmer," Maya admitted. "Happier. Like you finally figured out who you want to be." Ethan smiled faintly. "Maybe I did." Maya glanced toward the kitchen, where Elena was unpacking groceries. "She must be something special." "She is," Ethan said simply. Maya sighed, then grinned. "Then I guess I don't get to say 'I told you so' when this blows up in your face." "Nope," Ethan said, laughing. Meanwhile, Richard stayed silent. There were no phone calls, no emails, no attempts to drag Ethan back. But there were whispers. Ethan heard from former employees that Cole Global had taken a hit after Elena's case resurfaced in the media. Investors were nervous. The empire Richard had built was shaking. One evening, as Ethan sat with Elena grading papers, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his father. "We need to talk." Ethan stared at it for a long time, then turned the phone over and set it aside. "Are you going to see him?" Elena asked carefully. "Not yet," Ethan said. "He's not ready to listen, and I'm not ready to bend." Months passed. Slowly, the media frenzy faded, and Ethan built a new rhythm to his life. He completed his degree, not because it would impress anyone, but because it mattered to him now. He started a nonprofit project with Maya, helping whistleblowers and corporate employees who faced retaliation for speaking the truth. It was hard work, frustrating at times, but it gave him a sense of purpose that no boardroom had ever given him. Elena, too, began to heal. Her reputation slowly recovered, and students respected her more than ever for standing by her principles. One spring evening, they walked across the campus courtyard where they had shared their first kiss. The air was warm, the trees in bloom. "This place feels different now," Elena said softly. "Maybe because we're different," Ethan replied. They stopped beneath the same street lamp where they had stood that night months ago. "Elena," Ethan said, his voice quiet but steady. "I don't know what the future looks like. I don't know if my father and I will ever reconcile, or if the world will stop judging us. But I know this: I want you in that future, whatever it costs." Elena's eyes glistened. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." She smiled. And this time it wasn't fragile or hesitant. It was the smile of someone who had survived the storm and found the sun again. "I want that future too," she whispered. They kissed beneath the street lamp, their shadows merging on the ground. And in that moment, all the noise, the scandals, the threats, the empire they had walked away from, seemed far away. For the first time, it wasn't about who they had been, or what they had lost. It was about who they were becoming. Together. That night, as they sat on the steps outside the lecture hall, Ethan turned to Elena and said softly, "You know, I used to think my life was already written for me, that I was just supposed to follow the script. But now—" "Now?" Elena prompted. "Now I think we get to write our own story." Elena smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "Then let's make it a good one." Reflection. Closing voiceover. Ethan's voice would be heard as the screen fades to black. Sometimes the truth costs everything, but sometimes losing everything is the only way to finally find yourself. What would you choose, safety or the truth? Weeks later, Ethan walked past the lecture hall where he had first seen her, the memory catching him off guard. He paused, staring at the familiar doorway, and a strange mix of nostalgia and gratitude washed over him. Life felt different now, simpler, but freer. There were no more bodyguards waiting outside, no luxury car idling by the curb. Just Ethan, a cup of coffee in his hand, and a sense of peace he had never known before. His father hadn't spoken to him since that night. There were rumors in the news about Cole Global fighting another lawsuit, rumors about Richard's health, about shareholder pressure, about whether the company would survive the next quarter. But Ethan no longer checked those headlines every morning. For the first time, his life was his own. Later that night, in the quiet of his small apartment, Ethan sat at his desk with his journal open. The page was blank, waiting. He thought about everything he had lost: the mansion, the inheritance, the future that had been planned for him since birth. And he thought about everything he had gained. He began to write. Sometimes love costs you everything, but losing everything is how you find out what really matters. He paused, the words sitting heavy on the page, then added, "The truth is messy, it hurts, but it sets you free. And maybe that's what life is about, choosing freedom, even when it breaks your heart." Ethan closed the journal and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. He could still hear his father's voice from that night, cold and final. "You'll regret this." Maybe he would. Maybe one day, when life was hard and the money had run out, he'd think about what he gave up and wonder if it was worth it. But as he thought of Elena, her laughter, her strength, the way she had stood her ground against his father, he knew the answer. Yes, it was worth it. A few days later, Ethan found himself back on campus again, this time waiting for Elena outside her office. When she came out, she looked surprised. "Everything okay?" she asked. He smiled. "Everything's more than okay. I just wanted to walk you home." She studied him for a moment, then nodded, a soft smile forming on her lips. As they walked together, Ethan noticed how quiet the campus was, how the evening light turned everything gold. It felt like a new beginning. "You know," Elena said softly, "I used to wonder if telling the truth was worth it, if losing everything had been a mistake." "And now?" Ethan asked. She looked at him, her expression tender. "Now I think it was the only way to get here. To this moment." Ethan stopped walking and turned to face her. "Then maybe that's the point. Maybe we have to lose the life we thought we wanted to find the life we were meant to have." Elena smiled, and in her eyes he saw not just love but pride in what they had survived, in who they had chosen to become. That night, back at his apartment, Ethan recorded a short video for the nonprofit he had started with Maya. He stared into the camera, speaking not just to strangers, but to the younger version of himself who had once felt trapped and voiceless. "If you're watching this, maybe you're where I was, afraid to tell the truth, afraid of what it will cost you. I won't lie to you. The truth will cost you something, maybe everything. But when the dust settles, you'll know who you are. And that's worth more than anything you can lose." He hesitated for a moment, then added one last line. "So tell me, what would you choose, safety or the truth?" He hit upload, sat back, and smiled, because whatever came next, he was ready. Ethan and Elena sitting on the bench as the first rays of dawn break over the horizon. The world around them is quiet, almost sacred, as if the universe itself is pausing to witness this moment. Ethan's shoulders finally relax, the tension of the last few weeks melting away. Elena leans her head gently against his shoulder, her eyes closed, a faint smile on her lips. There are no words. They don't need them. Everything they fought for, everything they lost, has led to this stillness. As the sun rises higher, bathing them in gold, the narrator's voice begins, soft but powerful. When the truth finally came out, Ethan didn't just choose love, he chose integrity. He chose to stand on the side of what was right, even when it cost him everything. That choice didn't just change his future, it changed who he was. The camera slowly pulls back, showing the two of them as small silhouettes against the wide-open sky, a visual metaphor for freedom. Now the question is for you. Would you do the same? Would you risk everything, wealth, family, comfort, to stand with someone you love if the whole world turned against them? There's a beat of silence just long enough to make viewers think. The sound of morning birds fills the air. Then the on-screen text appears, paired with Ethan and Elena smiling at each other, ready for whatever comes next. Drop your answer in the comments. I want to know what you would choose. If this story moved you, hit like and subscribe. There are more dramatic twist-ending stories coming your way every week. The music swells, hopeful and cinematic, as the frame freezes on Ethan and Elena holding hands. A perfect final image. Fade to black.